Sonic has often been accused of falling apart when it shifted to 3D, that the golden age was over and in its place were janky unfinished messes that were only liked by diehards, but that honestly couldn't be more dead wrong. Sonic's first 3D outing landed, stuck it, and set what should have been a slam dunk precedent, only to get swallowed up by Sega USA's constant blunders in the name of extending the lifespan of the Genesis. Sonic essentially skipped the Saturn, with the ill-fated Sonic X-Treme never coming to fruition, although Sonic Jam, a collection of older Sonic games, had a small 3D hub that served as a bit of a test for what was to come, plus Nights in a Dream served as a testing ground for some ideas, specifically when it comes to the VPET stuff. Finally, in 1998, Sega introduced its new console, the Dreamcast, into the world, and with it, Sonic Adventure. And while it wouldn't turn the Dreamcast's prospects around, it was a strong start that led to tons of other great titles for the doomed console, as well as some amount for the actual Sonic franchise. Sonic Adventure is a good-looking game. If nothing else, it showed off the Dreamcast well. The levels are all large, impressively so, to accommodate for Sonic and his speed, and almost all of them have a few fancy set-piece moments, from a killer whale to giant wall runs that look impressive even today with their camera angles and directing. Tons of variety as well, and of course, it's all scored incredibly. A laid-back beach with some mellow electric guitar, a frosty mountain cave with icicles hanging from the ceiling, a loud, gaudy casino, a theme park castle. You kinda never know what you're gonna get. I've never been crazy about Amy's redesign, but I think everyone else looks pretty good. The lack of mouths is what it is, honestly, but there's very clear work into making these characters work in 3D, from Eggman to Sonic to Knuckles to the new characters. Chaos especially, a water monster that changes the more Chaos Emeralds it has, who has this very alien design, with some pretty impressive translucency effects too. As for the generic NPCs, I mean, they're a bit pale and ghostly, but for filling space, it works. However, it is the beginning of a slippery slope that would see its ultimate payoff later, in how they look a little odd standing next to a 3-foot-tall bipedal blue hedgehog, to say the least. The cars are kind of funny. I think it's an interesting attempt to put the skybox texture on the windows to show reflection, but it doesn't exactly work. The music is incredible. Duh, it's Sonic, but it's also Crush 40 Sonic. Jun Senoue worked on Sonic 3 some, but Adventure was when he would become the sound of Sonic for several years, and continues to work on it to some extent to this day. And he would drag his band Crush 40 into it, making incredible butt rock, goofy, earnest, charming vocal themes, namely the opening song Open Your Heart, which is so silly, fun, and also just... it's a banger. I love it. It's not just that though, each character has their own theme, some vocalized, which tell a lot about them. Eggman has this imposing, kind of mechanical theme. Amy gets female vocals in a sort of love ballad that's usually played a little too loud. Sonic and Tails are a bit more whimsical, and this is the start of Knuckles' rap era, and this all kind of applies to the stages and hub areas too. Ice Cap has soft bells over guitar, but transitions into a real jam as you snowboard away from an avalanche. Speed Highway goes hard as hell, utilizing the sirens of the police chasing you, and so on. It's all fantastic. Sound mixing can be an issue in a lot of ways, to say the least. Voice clips play over each other frequently. The game is generally loud as shit. Sometimes the music drowns out the dialogue like Deadly Premonition, especially when it comes to Amy's vocal theme. You gotta turn down the TV pretty low if you want to hear anything for the rest of the day. Just like flat out this game, max volume at all times. Oh yeah, while I'm on the topic, there's voice acting now. We finally get to hear Sonic and his friends. I like them. I think everyone is good. Sonic is a bit goofy and aloof, but that fits him. Tails sounds like a dorky kid. I'm sure someone on YouTube has made a pissed off rant video about that, but I think it fits him really well. Knuckles, I mean... oh no! And Eggman has a faux intimidating thing going on. He projects and sounds like he's trying too hard, and it's all really good. I suppose the character that's the most controversial is probably Big. You can dunk on him a little bit, but he's cute in his own goofy way too. Sonic Adventure had a really tough task ahead of it. Make a 3D game about going fast as hell, and this poses a ton of issues. You need a lot of land to make this happen, and if they don't stretch on long enough or have methods to slow you down, they'll be over in a blink. This game strikes a good balance with skill. A lot of levels are over pretty quick, sometimes in intended ways, sometimes less so. While first runs will be slowed down in a system similar to what 2D Sonic did, with slower, safer paths that you fall onto if you mess up the cool stuff, and it's all facilitated by Sonic's incredible movement. Sonic only really has one additional move by default, the homing attack, which is used to target enemies as they're obviously much harder to hit in a 3D space, but doing so also lets Sonic chain these to reach additional routes or shortcuts, and it's a pretty neutral addition, honestly. It comes up a lot less than you'd expect. I think in total it's something you're maybe expected to do like 10 or 15 times throughout the story, and a lot of it is just normal Sonic stuff, and it's sometimes useful outside of that, like it gives you a little extra horizontal distance, but it's not a massive part of Sonic's toolkit. Sonic Adventure also has some light RPG elements, and one such is upgrades, some mandatory, some optional, that add to a character's moveset, which also gives Sonic the light speed dash, which comes up even less. If Sonic charges his spin dash long enough, he can release the charge to run through a line of rings, even in midair. All of this only comes up maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the game, probably because it kills the pace to have to charge it for several seconds, an issue this game's sequel would eventually completely solve. This can also be upgraded twice, once to reduce the charge time, although not as significantly as you hope, and once to let it target enemies, which comes up once. Going back to Sonic at his base, he cruises. It kind of borders on too much, and it's really great. It's fast, it's freeing, and when combined with Sonic's Titanic jump floatiness, which increases while A is held, and sometimes with his fast fall, which he can do by holding B, it kinda turns the game inside out. Sonic is fast on the ground, but his spin dash is faster, carries momentum like crazy, and can be jumped out of. Find a ramp, a slight incline, even a terrain bump, and the game kinda crumbles. Levels often fold in or wrap in on themselves, which can lead to some incredible half-level skips, many of which I can't even get close to pulling off, but check out a speedrun of this game. It's crazy. It's so much fun to take a swing at these insane skips, to learn the easy ones, to try to pull off the harder ones. It feels great, whether it's intended or not, and I do think to some extent they realized how broken it was at some point, because some of the time trials are really tight without these tricks. Sonic isn't alone though. There are 6 other stories following other characters, most of whom have their own twists on fast-paced gameplay, although not as all-out straightforwardly as Sonic, but we can loop back to those when they come up. Same for the smaller mini-games that appear here and there, and the bosses, although generally they are what you'd imagine a boss with that moveset would look like. You mash the homing attack button an awful lot. Sonic Adventure's pseudo-RPG stuff also results in something almost entirely unique for this franchise. A series of hub worlds that connect levels, often with small puzzles, necessary interactions, or boss fights to wall off progress. Plus plenty of randoms to talk to for hints or flavor, and access to the Chao Garden, a pet simulator best touched on in its own section. The first and most prominent of these is Station Square, a small city split into a few parts, the most populated, with people offering hints on where to go and what to do, like, oh, I saw some shoes in the sewer, which is a hint to get the light speed dash, or even just silly little flavor. One guy at the pool has a whole developing storyline you can go back to over and over again, where his 2 girlfriends eventually meet each other and his life falls apart. There's never really a reason for you to go to the pool again, it's all just off to the side if you feel like exploring, and I love it. The train connects to the Mystic Ruins, a more remote area housing Tails' lab, the Master Emerald, which is mostly irrelevant in this game, and the forest with the temple and Big's shack. The forest is a bit miserable to search around. It's all very samey and dense and maze-like, but it is pretty cool theming. The devs even went out to South America on an Adam Sandler vacation for research on this area, and it gives it a super distinct look and feel with its Aztec temple thing going on. The egg carrier is the most elaborate, with plenty of interior and exteriors to poke around, although it's obviously empty of humans, as it's, Eggman's ship. I suppose I should touch on emblems too. There are 130 of them, one is obtained for clearing a stage or minigame, but each main stage has 2 bonus objectives too. Unfortunately, these don't stack, which is what kinda kills them for me. For Sonic specifically, the second playthrough of the stage has the goal of finishing the stage with 50 rings, which counterintuitively forces you to go slow and play carefully, while the third is the speed run, or the good part. If you could knock out multiple of these at once, it'd be a great system, especially for the other characters, but as is, it makes grinding through it all pretty grueling, as you'll be playing every main stage at least 3 times, assuming you can do the speed thing in a reasonable time. It's also worth noting that for the most part, I think the game is pretty easy and you'll almost certainly have the 50 rings at the end of most, if not all stages, which certainly doesn't help the system any, but yeah, it's not great. There are also a few emblems obtained in other ways, namely by finding them in the hubs and competing in the Chao races, but that's a pretty small portion of the total. Also, the emblems don't actually do anything, at least in this version of the game. Sonic starts off with a boss fight against Chaos Zero. To call it a fight is a bit generous, you kinda just mash the homing attack and it solves itself, but it is a really cool start. The police standoff is unique. It's this big opening cutscene that shows off the game's graphics and looks a lot nicer than even some of the later areas. And like Knuckles in the last important game, it serves to introduce a new villain, this one much more threatening and involved in the plot. Chaos is kind of forgotten about for the time being for some relaxing. The plot takes a bit to actually start, but of course, this iconic scene plays out.
Watch out! You're gonna crash! Ah!
Leading to the first real level, Emerald Coast. Sonic has always had a way with first levels. Green Hill is the most iconic stage in the series for a reason. It's a brilliant display of the concept, lots of places to get speed, some spectacle, and the best of the layered paths, where the upper paths are the fastest and most fun, and your punishment for failure is falling to a slower path. Adventure can't do that most of the time. The Dreamcast disc had very limited space, and extreme cases of multiple paths were pretty impossible. The stages demand some amount of linearity and straightforwardness, like the worst of Sonic 1, and yet it works. The music is maybe the best in the game beyond the title theme. The beach is gorgeous, relaxed, chill, and has some brief but explosive spectacle, namely the big orca whale chase. And while the stage may only have some very brief intended alternate paths, like this cave that skips maybe like 15 seconds, and the like, it's one of the better stages for showing off how crazy the game can be. The quick boardwalk section near the start of the level is the game's most simple and natural skip. The jump is obvious and probably intended, and it saves about 5 seconds, plus it's easy and pretty reliable to pull off. Many people probably discovered how fun this game is to break here, and the stage is great for it, like jumping off this huge ramp to skip a cave, and weirder shit I can't pull off, like the umbrella skips. It's not to entirely discredit the intended design either. The level, played straight, is still a lot of fun. Most islands have some goodies hidden around if you want to explore, including right behind you at the start. The big ramps and verticality are exciting. The slower moments, like this pond, can be skipped by playing well. The orca is iconic, and the stage is so straightforward it rarely gets a chance to be janky. It may well be the best stage in the game design-wise. Not unusual for Sonic games, but an interesting showcase of how first levels in these games often serve as a thesis statement for what the game is at its best. Sonic is fast, the camera works, the ability to bend the rules is all over. It's just perfectly Sonic Adventure. You get a lot of the same feelings as you continue too, although levels tend to focus on different areas over the freeformness of the opener. After exploring the open world for a bit, and fighting quite possibly the worst boss of all time, which can be killed in like 2 seconds, you enter Windy Valley. The most linear of the game's levels by far, but one that does a pretty good job on the spectacle side. There's no major skips or breaks in Windy Valley, and certainly not to the typical extent that this game has, but it has a lot of cool moments that are meant to make the Dreamcast seem like the best thing ever, and the final run is full of them. I don't even necessarily think that's a bad thing. Loop-to-loops don't serve a purpose in Sonic 1, but, you know, they're fun to go around. Casinopolis is a terrible idea though. I get the motivation, the goal is a bit different here. Collect 400 rings primarily by playing pinball. Sonic is a pinball, he feels like a pinball, his roots are pinball. It's cute, but both tables are so slow to give you rings that it becomes a very tedious slog, and the optimal strategy is immediately failing out of them to scrounge for rings in the more normal, straightforward sewer segment. I'm not even sure if you can beat the 5-minute time limit on the tables alone, although I do know in DX you can skip literally the whole level, so that's really something to see. Ice Cap is another good one. It's weird that it's implied to be the Sonic 3 stage. It was pretty rare until Generations to revisit spots in this series. You can skip all the slow, laborious cave stuff, and this ramp up here is so perfectly placed that it almost feels like the game wants you to do it. It's maybe the easiest big skip in the game. A lot of the level gets eaten up by the snowboarding stuff, which the camera does not like, and is kind of mindless with how impossible it is to fail, but it's also so hilariously 90s that it's hard not to be charmed by its silliness. Ice Cap would be a much worse level without the skip, to be fair. The cave part is pretty tedious, but I admittedly love the level for its payoff face if you do know the trick. And then there's 2 bosses in a row after, both kinda bad, a real Sonic staple. Knuckles is... Oh no is so iconic though. I do feel kinda bad for Knuckles, 2 games in a row getting tricked by Eggman because he's a goober. I hate to tell you man, nobody but you wants the Master Emerald. You don't have to be here. As for Chaos 4, it's a weird fish that pops up every once in a while in this pond. Chaos 4 has always been something. The water is like jello, you sink really slow in it, so there's really no threat from the water. And most of Chaos's attacks kinda don't do anything or almost never hit you. His water splash attack kinda just launches you into the air, and his projectiles are extremely easy to dodge, if not just accidentally avoid. After this boss rush, the game decides it needed more variety. It didn't. Sky Chase Act 1 sucks, and yes, you do have to do this twice. It's a scrolling shooter and not a particularly bad one if I'm being honest, it's just a mindless, easy, and extraordinarily long one, where the spectacle runs out well before the stage ends. Anyways, Twinkle Park is kinda cool. The bumper car segment is pretty whatever, but the verticality of the stage is neat. It gives you some really cool vectors for skipping stuff with good play, like spin dashing up walls or off of ramps, plus the risk of falling back to the start makes it more tense than just dying usually is and getting sent back 20 seconds. Also, it's like a giant mini golf castle. It's a really fun setting. You may have noticed that I haven't touched on the story much up to this point. Yeah, he's Sonic. He's the generic shonen good guy. He does all the levels except for one, gets the emeralds, and confronts the big bads. The only really relevant bit in his story, beyond meeting other characters in their own, more interesting stories, is a brief flashback informing the backstory of Chaos as a tragic villain. Once a god to the Chao, he was consumed by rage after watching the Echidna tribe destroy his altar and harm the Chao because they were scared of Chaos. It gives him a bit more depth than the fairly static Eggman, and the Chao Chaos name thing is a cute little nod. More on Chaos later though. Speed Highway is pretty much the iconic Sonic Adventure 1 stage. It's the one in Generations, and it's for good reason. Have you heard the music? It's so good. The nighttime skyline of the city, the verticality, and being able to make huge jumps off of the highway, the loops, skipping this slow-moving platform by running on the beam, this big wall run, that crazy skip I can't do where you make a tricky jump off this building. This level's almost as good as Emerald Coast, maybe even crazier if you can pull off the skips. Fast-paced and full of spectacle, but good at rewarding skill with shortcuts. Like, yeah, no shit, this level became iconic. Even the weird little city square segment at the end that feels kind of pointless has some skips and tricks if you know what you're doing. It's pretty much the perfect level alongside Emerald Coast to show how cool this game can be. Pretty much every single one should have been more of this. It's kind of the refined essence of why I love this game so much. I'm tempted to call Red Mountain gimmicky, and it kind of is. The monkey bars are slow and tedious to cross, there's these wonky, wobbling platforms, but you can skip it all in traditional Sonic Adventure fashion, and to be fair, I do love elements of this level too. The trick jumps over wide gaps to skip the monkey bars, the naturalistic environment which gives you a lot of space to break things, the whole inner volcano area which is more linear but no less fun with all the falling pillars and that. It's not quite Radical Highway, but it's another really fun one. Anyway, Sky Chase Act 2, and then a fight with Gamma, who is defended by Amy. Sonic doesn't get it, but we will later. Thanks, I was already headed that way. Thanks, I know. Skydeck is fine, the early bits are too restrictive, the middle where it isn't is too gimmicky, primarily the weird section where you die if you don't take cover from the wind, and the end gets too restrictive again. There's a pretty minimal amount of cool tricks and freedom of expression, but the setting is cool. I mean, airships in general are just badass. Chaos 6, I mean, it's an interesting idea, which bosses in this game usually aren't. The very animalistic, chimera-esque design is really cool, but it kinda just stands there menacingly, waiting to be frozen by throwing enemies at it, which isn't a mechanic used literally anywhere else. It's on the better end of bosses for this game, not that that says a ton I guess. Anyways, Lost World has maybe the coolest aesthetic. The Aztec runes thing goes crazy. The giant snake things are also like, I don't really get what they are, but I'm glad they're here. But also half of this level's gimmicks, the really cool snakes included, as well as the dark room, are fairly tedious and hard to break. The stage more than makes up for it in the end though, with the magnetic wall segment. Holy shit, they did not think for even 1 second about what unlimited verticality spin dashes would do to this game. Level design? No thanks. Shit is so fucking cool. Final egg is, fine. I don't hate it. It's the level that feels the most broken. Sometimes you take a huge blind fall and just die. Sometimes the speed boosters feel weird and launch you off in ways that you don't expect. Sometimes the fans that blow you between each other just kinda don't work right and drop you. And this enemy spam room feels a bit like a Mario Maker level made by like a 6-year-old. And the music is really good. It's probably the one I have the least nice to say about, but it is like sufficiently hard as a final challenge before the end, I guess. Egg Hornet sucks. Get a load of this is a very funny line every single time. I know it is, but also, goddamn. Setting a boss over an infinite void in a game that, despite everything I've said, can be a touch janky and unreliable is a nightmare. The homing attack stuff isn't terrible, the tops are kind of fun, but there's always that chance that it just breaks. And when you crash that slight bit of unreliability into all of the waiting that happens between when you're able to get hits in, it gets very frustrating and tedious very fast. That final kamikaze attack though, that's pure art. That is wonderful. That is such a funny trick. And with that, Sonic has saved the day, but like a digital Rashomon, that's not how Tails remembers it. Tails gets what is, on paper, a really unique gimmick in that all of his levels are races, but goddamn are they easy. You will never even come close to losing. Tails also has the unique mechanic of flight, something that is frankly shocking in how crazy broken it is. You can beat Windy Valley without ever touching the ground, and outside of needing to know where a few death barriers are, it's probably the easiest way to beat the level. It's kinda epic, and given its isolation to Tails, I really can't even be mad that it's this broken. It makes the spin dash look tame in comparison, and that's crazy. As Tails is always with Sonic, his story is largely an abridged version of Sonic's, covering shortened versions of Windy Valley, only the back half, Casinopolis, only the sewer, Ice Cap, only the snowboarding, both Sky Chases in full, kill me, Skydeck, a very fun stage to break his Tails given how restrictive it is for Sonic, and 2 more unique levels, Sandhill, a unique snowboarding, sandboarding mission for Tails with some neat visuals, and Speed Highway, an entirely unique version of the stage, posed as a race against Eggman after Sonic's story is concluded, as they race to defuse a bomb in Station Square. While Tails mostly hits the same story beats as Sonic, Eggman is framed very differently from Tails' perspective, with more menacing line delivery to show a difference in how Sonic sees the world, which is a great little detail that really most developers wouldn't have thought to put in, and you probably wouldn't even notice if you played the 2 stories too far apart. And it all ties into Tails' big finale where he stands up to Eggman without Sonic. While most of Tails' bosses are the same as Sonic's, although missing a few like Chaos Zero and 6, he does get a unique fight against the Eggwalker to finish Eggman off, which is a fine enough final boss, with a cool design and a gimmick well suited for Tails' abilities. Tails' story is kinda the least interesting. There's some cute stuff with Tails' story arc, but it largely feels like an abridged version of what we just did with Sonic. Same gameplay, but with a very broken gimmick stapled on top that's really only crazy abusable in 2 stages, and most of the time those stages are hugely abridged anyway, plus Sky Chase again. Really. It's not bringing a lot to the table in the way all the others do, so we may as well move on. Knuckles is something entirely different, with segments that are typically called Emerald Hunts, where Knuckles explores small chunks of levels to find emeralds. These are typically very small segments of Sonic stages, like that kinda pointless inner city portion of Speed Highway with the goal of finding 3 fragments of the Master Emerald. Knuckles can glide and climb as he did in Sonic and Knuckles, and if he actually participated in linear stages, he would be comically broken to an extent that would make even Tails blush. However, the exploration focus of these segments means that it's a fairly measured and reasonable ability, and makes getting around an absolute joy, while also allowing verticality in the hiding spots of the emerald shards. Knuckles' main way of detecting these emerald fragments is the radar, which beeps loudly and changes color whenever Knuckles gets close, and because most of the stages are so small, you'll often have a relatively good idea of where all three are by the time you get the first, although some hiding spots are definitely trickier than others. There's also a hint system here. You can speak to the glowing red hint orb for some advice on where to go, and honestly I might as well just rip the band-aid off now. That glowing red orb is Tikal, who died in the past trying to protect Chaos. But honestly, the hints are kinda pointless on stages this simple. There's not a lot of gimmicks to them or like hugely intricate design that would lead you to need hints to get around. The radar is pretty much powerful enough to do it itself. The only thing that's bad about Knuckles is his time trials. They're an absolute mess, really, as each stage has a decent chunk of emerald placements, and most, if not all, the stages have placements and configurations that are genuinely impossible in the time limit. You kinda just gotta keep re-rolling until things happen to work out in a favorable way. I do love how Knuckles' story plays out. He's perhaps the most irrelevant character overall, entirely focused on fixing the Master Emerald to the point of getting tricked by Eggman again. Knuckles is literally the only character with any interest in the Master Emeralds. He almost feels underutilized. It's eventually revealed that Tikal gave her life to seal Chaos inside the Master Emerald, and the purpose of Knuckles guarding it was to prevent Chaos's release, which I don't think he ever learns. Plus the backstory is all about the Echidna tribe, which should be of great interest to Knuckles, but Knuckles learns very little about this and doesn't really seem to give a shit. He's a charming little goober. Knuckles doesn't have any unique levels. He runs through the city part of Speed Highway, Casinopolis' floor, which is admittedly an area you don't spend much time in, especially the cool upper areas with the statues, a big chunk of Red Mountain, the magnetic wall part of Lost World, and a mostly unique area of Skydeck, which has a gimmick where Knuckles can tilt the stage to open new paths. Convoluted if neat, although the switch is really far out of the way, and it would probably be a much better level if it was somewhere central to help keep the flow up a little. On top of Chaos 4 and 6, Knuckles is the only guy who gets to fight Sonic, and more relevantly, Chaos 2. I mean, he's just like Chaos Zero but bigger, and he kinda just blobs around while you glide into him. Still, it's nice that Knuckles was given a little something unique. It's kinda weird that we never get to see Chaos 1, 3, or 5 now that I'm thinking about it. To this day, we still don't know what those forms look like, but I guess like in the context of him being a boss in this game, since he dies at the end of this game, it'd be kinda weird if they like stuck in Chaos 1 because it'd just be like a slightly bigger Chaos probably and would be kind of redundant. The Knuckles story is good. Despite the simplicity and extremely short length, it's nice that they're so different. A bit of extra complexity or unique stage would have been huge for him, although there's the obvious point to make that these extra campaigns are meant to reuse as much content as possible in order to fill the runtime for as little money as possible. I enjoy the glide, I enjoy exploring levels more in depth than you usually get to do with the other characters, and I like Knuckles being goofy. It's probably my third favorite of the stories, all things considered. Amy is an interesting idea if nothing else, although her gameplay doesn't really work for me, because her way of interacting with speed is not the most fun. Amy is slow as hell, but eventually speeds up to not quite Sonic speed, but a decent enough speed. However, any bump or drop in pace ends that immediately, and it's back to 5 seconds of moving at a crawl. Amy's hammer attack halts all momentum. It sucks ass, unless you're at full speed, where it becomes this badass flip that actually maintains your speed. It can be frustrating to play Amy by design, and sometimes it's just not fun because you're stuck in areas where you're forced to go slow for the entirety of them. But there is a satisfaction to learning the levels to maintain speed with her, in part because of her weird ass gimmick. Amy's levels are Resident Evil Mr. X segments. A large robot, Zero, chases her through levels and attacks when close, which forces Amy to keep moving and hopefully maintain speed, although you can kinda just whack him around if needed. The game doesn't really tell you that, but if you're ever in a pinch, you can just hit him a couple times and you'll be fine. But when you're like 6 and stupid as hell, it can be pretty scary and intense. It's not a terrible gimmick for adding a unique twist on speed, especially when that twist is maintaining it, but at only 3 levels, the least of any character, it's fairly obvious that even the developers acknowledged it was a bit thin. To her credit, the levels from other characters Amy runs through, Twinkle Park and Final Egg, are pretty heavily redesigned to accommodate her, with a more puzzle-like element added to keep her in one spot while dodging attacks. Hitting a number of buttons and going through a hall of mirrors that disorient you in Twinkle Park, and needing to place colored gems in the correct spots, and also this cool ass monitor scene, like, it's just a funny gag. In Final Egg, while her third stage, Hot Shelter, is mostly unique to her. It's a compact area full of moving gears that she has to ride around, doors that open slow as hell, and tight hallways. And all these levels do a good job of making Zero seem like an intense threat. Zero's also a unique boss, if one that maybe thematically doesn't fit given how unkillable he was in the levels, but it's a fine enough fight where you push him into an electric fence to make him vulnerable to attacks, although his invincibility period feels like it lasts a little bit too long without a tell, and sometimes your hits kinda just pass through him, which can be a touch frustrating, although this game is easy as hell. It's really hard to die, so it's not like it's a huge issue. Amy's story also has a bit more going on than the previous three characters, as she's captured early on and held under watch by one of Eggman's new E-Series robots, E-102 Gamma, who she befriends and aids, protecting him against Sonic after their fight and helping him discover his purpose of freeing his fellow Flickies from the other robots, a series of events we'll see play out a little bit later. It's a nice change for her. Sonic and Tails have always been straightforwardly heroic, and Knuckles has always been kind of a goofball. But Amy gets a chance to exist outside of being the damsel in distress she was in CD. She shows off her clingy and girly side sometimes, but also a kindness the other characters can be too aloof to be involved in. While Amy is probably my least favorite character to control, I'd be hard-pressed to call her segments bad. They aim for something entirely different and mostly nail what they're setting out to do. There's a lot of tension, it has nice moments to flesh out Amy, and it's a fairly unique way to play with this game's speed focus. Now for everyone's least favorite, Big the Cat, or to subtitle this section, In Defense of Big. Guys, it's really not that bad. It's actually a pretty fun fishing game, it's just that the game doesn't bother explaining it at all, which makes a lot of people not get it. When Froggy or fish bites the hook, hold down the control stick to hook him, point the stick vaguely in the direction he's moving, and reel it in slowly. And if the tension gets too high, just let go for a second. You don't even have to use the fast reel, there's no reason to go fast in this minigame. It's really not that hard. I can wipe out most of these levels in like 60 seconds if I'm not going for the lure upgrades. Once you know what the game wants you to do, which is admittedly easier said than done, you have a pretty solid fishing minigame that serves as a fun distraction from the energy and pace of the rest of the game, set across a variety of locales, Twinkle Park, Ice Cap, Emerald Coast, and Hot Shelter, most of which incorporate a bit of exploration, with a lot of the level focusing on actually finding Froggy wherever he may be across a number of pools and fishing spots, especially in the later levels, as well as traveling around to track down the lure upgrades. As opposed to the time trials of other characters, Big's B and A rank missions center on catching a real big fish, which requires the better lures, and they can be a touch frustrating, as you don't know a fish's weight until you catch it, but the chill vibes and music and exploration for hidden fishing spots is still charming and satisfying. Big is also cute. Quit bullying him. He's dopey and he loves his homie Froggy, who is a regular-ass frog, which is just so fun and silly. That's kind of his whole story though. He's just looking for Froggy and ends up at a bunch of places. Up until the end where he ends up with Sonic at Chaos 6 for some reason.
That's not how I remember it.
And has to fish Froggy out of Chaos because Froggy accidentally ate a Chaos Emerald. It's a very dumb boss fight that takes like 20 seconds. And I have literally nothing else to say about it. There isn't a ton to say on Big, honestly. His story is a fun distraction that's woefully underexplained by the game, leading it to have an unfairly bad reputation. And I have a soft spot for the big goofball because look at him. E-102 Gamma is probably the part most people resonate with, and it's really not hard to see why. After a short initial training mission in Final Egg, Gamma is freed of Eggman's control by Amy and sets out on a mission to destroy all the series robots to free his fellow Flickies. This robot's got a burden and only he can carry it, and it's played straight and rather emotionally. Gamma has a ton of unique stuff going on and is incredibly memorable and fun for it. The most notable is that his timer counts downwards, not serving as a metric for skill, but as a time limit for each level, which can be extended by killing enemies, even more so by killing multiple at a time. Gamma's story is a fast-paced shooter, run through levels, lock onto 20 guys at a time, pop them all at once. It's pretty fun to blast through the whole thing, and it's especially fun to get through it with a good time, as it requires you to not only learn the layout of the levels, but also the layout of enemy placements so that you can maximize how many you take out at once. Mostly taking place after the main story, Gamma runs through Emerald Coast, Windy Valley, Red Mountain, and Hot Shelter, a very cool finale with that train ride, and fights his brothers at the end of each. These battles are not as cool as the story would imply, but I do appreciate the effort in making them all look a little different and adding a few moves every time you fight a new one. The big final battle is E101, Gamma's older brother, and the only cool fight. E101 is a giant floating monstrosity, and his shields make timing hits on him an actual process that takes thought and effort. Plus the perspective stuff with his ultimate attack is pretty sick. Of course, the infamous part of Gamma's story is its finale. With the rest of the E-series gone, Gamma needs to free his own Flicky to reunite the family. The moment is genuinely sad. The music is quiet and somber, and there's just this silence as Gamma kills himself. And it's played entirely straight. Gamma became a hero and gave it up to see some little dudes be happy. It's bittersweet and touching in a way you really wouldn't expect out of Sonic, especially a game this usually goofy. Gamma's story is great. It's a fun twist on the Sonic style, a touching story, fast-paced, and doesn't overstay its welcome. Like Sonic's, it's pretty much perfect. Completing all the other stories unlocks the final story, which would become a tradition in the series for a good while, and it's the big flashy supersonic boss fight against Perfect Chaos. Holy shit, that cutscene. It looks good, but there's millions of people dead. This is like 5 9/11s, no one's surviving that shit. Perfect Chaos is cool looking. I like that he's a giant, like, dragon thing. It reminds me of Yu-Gi-Oh! The fight is, something. You hold forward and kind of wiggle around the stick to get rings in order to keep your ring meter up, as like all supersonic appearances, you slowly drain them, and you attempt to dodge attacks, which is not as easy as it seems. And if you're going fast enough when you reach Perfect Chaos, you hurt him, and if not, you might as well just give up. You can only fail like once or twice before your ring count is too low and it's time to just start over. It can be a touch frustrating because Supersonic controls a bit like Super Ass. He's really fast, like even compared to Sonic, and he's very touchy. He likes to just jerk off in random directions, and sometimes the camera angles fuck you. If you're holding forward, they'll just kind of shoot you into a wall. But the spectacle for the fight is off the charts, and the reprise of the main theme absolutely kills. However, and I know I'm not the first person to say this, having it play during the first phase of the fight, and then following it up with some kind of generic orchestral stuff after is very underwhelming as far as the hype goes. These almost certainly should have been switched. If the final phase was the reprise with the music, it would have been 10 out of 10. And with all that, Tikal and Chaos go to heaven, and all's well that ends well, I suppose. The power of friendship is won, and all it cost was millions upon millions of lives. The big side mode in Sonic Adventure is the Chao Garden, and I'm certainly no expert. There are people who have dedicated tons of time to talking about the Chao Garden on YouTube. Cybershell is a very good place to start. It's not exactly my thing, and I need to get this video out in a reasonable time. Oh my god, it's been a while. Still no Pokemon XD, huh? Chao are extremely elaborate virtual pets. They can be fed, petted, and even bred to slowly raise their stats, as well as fed animals that are collected in the stages. All of this does require you to make your way back to the Chao Garden after every level, which is tedious. They're crazy cute, like kind of impossible not to love, especially since they make adorable little baby noises, and they slowly grow new features as you give them animals, which also boost their specific stats in the way that the animals would, where like a tiger gives them slightly higher stamina, or a bird gives them better flying, and otters give them better swimming and stuff like that. Even though I've never completed the All Emblems grind, I can't help but check on the Chao sometimes. I mean, look at them. The primary use for these adorable little V-Pets is Chao Racing, a mode where you watch the Chao race, and winning snags you an emblem for completion. And the races are, the camera decisions are bizarre, and it's essentially just a long cutscene. You don't really do a lot. It's also kind of a bafflingly long grind. This game can be beaten in like maybe 6 hours if you're messing around, and if you want to go for all the emblems, you'd maybe hit like 12 or 13. To get the best of the best in the Chao races requires tons of going through levels again to get animals and hunting down specific animals and like 20 hours of grinding to watch these races kind of unfold in front of your eyes when the camera cooperates. It's just not something I can put time into if I want to get this video out anytime soon. But notably, I'm just not much of a VPET guy. Chao are something that massively appeal to some people, and the people who Chao do appeal to will absolutely devote the rest of their life to breeding these things and getting all the crazy secrets and all the special Chao and this and that, and they're gonna eat it up. It's a good mode for not me, but a lot of people. While I'm here, I may as well talk about Chao Adventure. VPETs were quite popular in this era with Tamagotchi, Digimon, among others, and the Dreamcast hardware gave Sonic Adventure an extremely unique opportunity. The VMU, the Dreamcast memory card, can be used as a standalone device with a small screen of its own, and Chao are basically perfect for the little thing. Chao Adventure lets you take your little dude on the go, and all it costs you are two $8 watch batteries, and because the VMU tracks time down to the nanosecond, for some reason, you probably have like a solid 2 weeks before you're gonna need more. As with most VPETs, Chao Adventure isn't excessively gamey, but is instead mostly a way to boost your Chao's stats semi-passively. As your Chao slowly walks and occasionally bumps into events, like meeting one of the playable characters who train them to boost one of their stats, finding treasure chests which give them items to boost their stats, or fighting mean Chao in a simple minigame, although for the most part not a lot happens. It's meant to be fiddled with every once in a while throughout the day, not focused on, which does make it kinda hard for a video like this. Chao Adventure also offers a lot of small features that probably should have just been in the base game, primarily seeing your Chao's stats, which would have been nice. Additionally, the game is multiplayer with the ability to play a small battle minigame or to breed Chao with others, to obtain new eggs, which would have been a fun use for the VMU as a playground toy if you were a Dreamcast kid who happened to somehow know a second Dreamcast kid. And no, you will not be seeing these features because I do not want to buy even more watch batteries. Lastly, there's a small matching minigame that lets you earn fruit. It's extremely basic, you just pick 2 cards and if they match you get some points, and it's especially basic in the smartphone era, but it is a bit more interactive than the little game typically is, I suppose. Much like Chao in the main game, Chao Adventure isn't for me, but I could see someone really into the VPET part of Sonic Adventure loving this as an extension of the Chao stuff in the game, especially because it's a really unique feature of the Dreamcast that turns these little guys portable and makes them into real VPETs. Also, I guess worth a mention, because I didn't know where else to put it, Sonic Adventure had DLC. Yeah, the Dreamcast was very ahead of its time. These were incredibly minor updates for Christmas and New Year's, which just added decorations around Station Square like a Christmas tree, which is a fun little idea for the first majorly internet-focused console, although, you know, it's like 1 second of content. It's a bit bizarre that this content never got reused though. In this game's updated port on the GameCube, they could have just tied it to the system clock, and for the later ports of that version, you know, those are games that are on systems always connected to the internet, so I don't know, maybe they just forgot. I love Sonic Adventure. It's kinda my ideal Sonic, maybe my ideal game overall. Sonic controls, I mean, okay, he's a bit unwieldy and a little hard to get around, but the game is so ridiculously freeing when you learn to wrangle it. The skips are insane, the speed is incredible, and it's so fun to go fast, to master the spin dash. I love it. We've got incredible music, fun level themes, a killer butt rock song from Crush 40, and Sonic is just a portion of his own game. The alternate gameplay styles aren't perfect, but they each have something to love. Tails is a bit repetitive when paired up with Sonic, but is even more hilariously broken, and Tails has a nice arc in it. Knuckles is a bit simplistic, but has nice moments and freedom to explore. Amy has a nice story, and the idea kinda works some of the time, even if it's probably the weakest. Big is poorly explained, but a pretty chill and fun minigame when you learn it. And Gamma's levels, they're pretty much perfect. I don't have any criticism to throw in there in the front. Plus, the Chao may be a giant grind, but damn are they cute, and I'm sure someone goes nuts for them. There's a charm to the jank of Sonic Adventure. The voice acting and sound editing are kinda sheer insanity, and because of that, they're also kind of incredible. I don't know if there's a scene in this game that isn't funny in some way outside of maybe Gamma's final scene, which doesn't have any talking. The character models are silly and over-exaggerated, but in a way that works, where they're kind of like old-era cartoon characters in a way you didn't typically see outside of Crash Bandicoot, which does it better, admittedly. The bosses all suck, but I also can't stop having fun. I enjoy every second of Sonic Adventure. I love playing it, I love listening to it. It's a game of a game. Pretty much every second is fun, your dopamine is going crazy, you're trying some skip or succeeding at some skip or thinking of a new skip, you're always going fast, there's always some kind of spectacle. Sonic Adventure, deeply flawed as it is completely perfect, I think. Sega, though, decided it wasn't perfect enough and came at us with an enhanced port, so I guess we should talk about that. Sega's American division was crazy dumb in the 90s. They dragged out the lifespan of the Genesis endlessly, tried to force it to stick around longer with the questionable CD and 32X add-ons, and they spiked the Saturn, with a release so quick after its announcement that major retailers completely refused to work with them ever again. So by the time it got to the Dreamcast, things were already too late. After dropping out of the console race, Sega went third party, and one of their first orders of business was to start putting Sonic on fucking everything. While not the first game to release during Sega's new lot on life, Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut, with the DX, I assume, being also Director's Cut, would release for the GameCube in 2003 and would also be followed by a PC version soon after. And since DX, with its controversial graphics and tiny bit of bonus content, has also become the de facto version of the game, with the version on Xbox 360, which is backwards compatible on later Xboxes, PS3, and modern PCs being built on top of DX, with the Xbox 360 and PS3 version turning the bonus content into DLC, and even then not including all of it, but I have no idea why they did that, honestly. It's baffling. Sonic Adventure DX is controversial primarily for how it looks. In an effort to update the style of adventure, characters got new models which more closely match the style of the time as seen in Heroes, although only major characters got these updates, which does cause the NPCs and other minor characters, as well as a lot of the environments, to look extremely out of place, plus textures are all over the place. Some windows have been replaced with better looking windows, and some haven't. Some textures are way blurry and shittier than they were before, and some aren't. It's a bit of a jumbled mess. I don't think the character models themselves are bad, outside of being a touch jarring, but they reduce the cartoony style of the game quite a bit, which is a shame, and also, the lighting is a bit bad. They may have been a bit too ambitious with trying to throw shadows all over, as they tend to seem kinda random and odd looking, especially when it comes to characters' faces. Perhaps due to these overhauls, the game also has some occasional minor frame rate issues and slowdowns, although I do find this issue is mostly overblown by Sonic fans, as it's fairly rare and brief when it does happen. It's also worth mentioning that a lot of Sonic Adventure's infamous bugs are in fact unique to this version, like falling through the loop on Emerald Coast, which has undeniably harmed the reputation of the original unfairly, and in general, DX has a lot of these little rough edges that make it a generally worse experience. There's a lot of other minor changes here and there that you could skim the game for and point at, and others have, but the large picture is that it's a moderately uglier, buggier version of Sonic Adventure. It's, I think, generally the worst version, however it's also significantly more accessible given it's on everything, and for the most part the performance issues are mitigated in the modern ports. As for new content, there's not a ton honestly. It's primarily limited to new bonuses for emblem completion with a variety of unlockable Game Gear games for every 20 earned. Sonic the Hedgehog 8-bit, Sonic Drift, Sonic Chaos, Sonic Spinball 8-bit, Sonic Labyrinth, Sonic 2 8-bit, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine 8-bit, Sonic Triple Trouble, Sonic Drift 2, Tails Sky Patrol, Sonic Blast, and Tails Adventure, which are cool bonuses I suppose. The Sonic Game Gear games, even only a few years out, were fairly obscure and forgotten, so giving them a little love as bonuses is a nice treat, especially in conjunction with the Sonic Mega and Gems collections, and these games really wouldn't see re-releases until the kinda recent Sonic Origins collection. Although notably, these only exist in the GameCube version of DX, with the PS3, Xbox, and PC version excluding them for some reason, although you can mod them back in on PC if you really want to. The other reward for emblems is being able to use Metal Sonic after getting all 130, although he's just a skin swap for Sonic and can only be used in Sonic's story, so it's kinda whatever. The game also adds a mission mode, a series of gimmicky little challenges found in the hub worlds after clearing the game with a character, and these all consist of things like getting 100 rings in a certain level by a certain point, or finding a hidden balloon in the hub world or within a level, and so on, which are mostly kinda nothing. It's largely just filler content to pad the runtime with very little actual substance, and you're not going to get a lot out of them outside of them being a requirement for getting Metal Sonic if you want to go all the way with it. The Chao also get a few updates carried over from Sonic Adventure 2, which is neat, like being able to see their stats, thank God, and a few new interactions were added. As one would expect, Chao Adventure is also removed from the game for the simple reason that the VMU wasn't exactly a thing on the GameCube, but on the GameCube specifically, and not the later versions, it was replaced with a very similar feature. Tiny Chao Garden was a grand experiment and extended across a number of games, included as a feature in Sonic Advance 2, and Sonic Pinball Party, as well as being downloadable to the Game Boy Advance's RAM from the GameCube from Sonic Adventure DX, Director's Cut, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, and Phantasy Star Online 1 and 2 for some reason, and acts much the same as Chao Adventure had. The download version is really something, as its place on the GBA's RAM means it only exists as long as the GBA stays on, which is immensely inconvenient in terms of taking your Chao with you, and essentially limits it to being used to obtain the items available here, while staring at your GBA at home. Whereas the Sonic Advance and Pinball versions are much less ridiculous, as you can shut off the game and play something else between bouts of looking after your Chao. The versions of the Tiny Chao Garden vary game to game, with DX having a unique minigame alongside the minigame that's included in all versions. Chao Memory, included in all versions, is an upgraded remake of the memory game from Chao Adventure with a few added complexities. Depending on where the cards are on the board, they give slightly higher values of rings, and before the rounds start, a Chao wanders across the board moving the cards around a little, which adds a bit to it, although it's still a fairly simple memory game that won't distract you for too long, even if it is the best way to gain rings. DX's exclusive game, on the other hand, is Chao Search, where Chao asks a very angry, power-walking Sonic to find his friends using hints from Tikal, most of which are vague and apply to several Chao at any given moment, which makes the minigame often feel like a bit of a crapshoot to find whichever one the game actually wants you to, and is much more tedious than the memory game regardless. Both of these minigames grant rings, which can be spent on rare objects like fruit that gives strong stat boosts, unique egg colors like onyx and topaz, which are otherwise unavailable and can be transferred back to the main game, and otherwise unique Chao toys, so for Chao fans, there's at least a lot to love. Tiny Chao Garden, like Chao Adventure, really isn't for me, and the whole GBA RAM thing is a big bummer that really limits how much of a VPET it can actually be, although the memory game is a bit of a step up comparatively, and the Chao looks so damn cute in this chibi sprite style that it's pretty charming even if it is kind of a nothing game, at least if you're not going for like full Chao completion. If you are going for Chao completion, it's probably extremely useful because I imagine that these fruit are very powerful even if you still need to do a lot of animal grinding between. A lot of people hate Sonic Adventure DX because for an upgraded board it sure doesn't feel like it is. That said, beyond some bugs, it plays like Sonic Adventure. It has the same speed, the music, it looks a little bad, but if you wear glasses you can kind of fix that by not wearing them. And at its core, it's Sonic Adventure. It's not the best way to play the game unless you're on PC, where you can apply some bug fixes and appearance patches. I think the original looks and feels much better in almost every way. And with emulation, a majority of the bonus content in DX is easier to access than grinding out emblems, since you can just boot up any of these Game Gear games at any time. Never mind that bonus content not even being present in later releases for some ungodly reason, but if I'm being honest, the accessibility is a nice plus for this slightly worse version. I remember keeping this game on my Xbox and just booting it up from time to time to play through a few levels because this game is a joy, even in its slightly worse version. If this is what's available to you, it's still a great game worth playing, but I would definitely seek out the original version if possible, because I think for the most part it really is just the superior version in this case.